In the past 2 episodes, the Alexandria safe zone was attacked by zombies. Michonne reluctantly agreed to the Whisperer's demands for territory, thinking that life would finally settle down. However, trouble arose at the Hilltop. One night, Ezekiel heard commotion in the yard and rushed out to investigate. He discovered that a large tree had fallen outside the walls, causing the fence to collapse and damaging several residences. Connie had a feeling that this incident might be intentional. Other people, after she mentioned it, also found the situation suspicious. How could such a thick tree suddenly collapse when it wasn't dead? The prime suspects were the Whisperers, who seemed to be sending a warning to each community. Amidst the outrage, Jerry emerged holding an injured woman and revealed that 9 people were trapped. The focus shifted to rescuing them, with Ezekiel being the only one looking somber. The next day, Michonne led a group to the Hilltop to assist. They learned about the previous night's events through the radio. Eugene sat on the horse carriage with a downcast mood. He went to help repair the walls at the Hilltop, also taking the opportunity to clear his mind. After all, yesterday had been a shock to Eugene. During their journey, Michonne spotted a figure ahead and had the convoy stop. Through binoculars, she identified Ezekiel, which puzzled her. He should have been at the Hilltop fixing the fence. She instructed the others to continue while she investigated. Michonne reached a clearing in the woods and found only a horse. Ezekiel nowhere in sight. Michonne dismounted and searched the neighborhood until she found Ezekiel on an observation deck. Ezekiel was standing on the platform and could have fallen off if he hadn't been careful. Calling out to him, Michonne approached cautiously, worried about his state. Ezekiel's condition looked bad. Michonne guessed that Ezekiel had been under too much pressure and could not think straight for a while. Michonne held Ezekiel's hand and tried to comfort him. It turns out that Ezekiel was heartbroken when he saw the kingdom disbanded. Now that he's in the Hilltop, there's still no peace. Many of the injured from the previous night were former residents of the kingdom, still looking to him with hopeful eyes. He felt he had let them down. Understanding his feelings as a leader herself in Alexandria's safe zone, Michonne empathized with Ezekiel's turmoil. Unexpectedly, Ezekiel kissed her in the heat of the moment, which lasted for almost 10 seconds. Realizing his impulsive action, he apologized. Considering his situation, Michonne simply nodded in acceptance. At that moment, within the Alexandria safe zone, Aaron was conducting a self-defense class for the residents. These techniques had been taught to Aaron by Jesus back in the day. Lydia happened to pass by and was intrigued by the content of the class. And yet...
Hey Lydia! You think mommy will take me in?
Now you're just a freak.
Get the hell out of here.
Oh, right. No, she kicked your ass out.
Lydia did not refute this discriminatory behavior. She had grown accustomed to it. After leaving, Lydia fell into deep thought in a secluded corner. Although Lydia outwardly tried to appear indifferent, a sense of loneliness lingered within her. Negan, who was working, passed by and looked at the lost girl and didn't need to think about what was going on. Lydia comes here when she's depressed. This is the 3rd time this week. Negan's a little worried about her. Suddenly, Daryl emerged and without even acknowledging Negan, he directed Lydia to leave the area. His tone was firm, leaving no room for debate, resembling the stern attitude of a father towards his daughter. Daryl's perspective on Negan hadn't changed. If it weren't for Rick, Negan would have been dealt with long ago. Lydia stormed off towards home, her anger palpable. She arrived at her door, where someone had spray-painted the words "Silence the Whisperers." No doubt the bastards did it. During lunchtime, Lydia used to eat alone in a corner to avoid trouble. But today, things were different. Other people were perplexed by her behavior. Instead of responding, Lydia took out a knife and began dissecting a squirrel on the table, the sound of the blade against flesh sending shivers down the spines of those nearby. Blood even splattered on a boy's face. Lydia wanted to show through actions that she wasn't a fragile little girl and was capable of anything when pushed to the edge. The cafeteria fell silent, with everyone's attention on her. Gabriel didn't intervene. He didn't disapprove of Lydia's actions. Sensing that she had the others' attention, Lydia made a hushing gesture, the symbol of the Whisperers. Having accomplished her goal, Lydia didn't return home. Instead, she moved her belongings into the prison cell. I don't know why, but Lydia looked so much like Daryl when he was young. Shaking her head, Lydia acknowledged that she had tried evading the situation, but it only emboldened those people. She didn't want to hear Daryl's advice and didn't need him to fight her battles. She was determined to face everything on her own. Inside the Hilltop, the fallen tree was massive, and only 3 people had been rescued so far. Just then, the sound of growling could be heard from outside, indicating the approach of a horde of zombies. Moreover, It seemed that the zombies were heading straight for the fence that was being pressed by the fallen tree. If things continued like this, the damaged fence would not hold for long. Eventually, the whole tree would come crashing down. In this urgent situation, Yumiko rallied her team to venture out and slay the zombies. Their purpose was to buy them time to fortify the fence. The battle continues into the night. The zombies are coming every once in a while. Just like in the Alexandria safe zone, Luke and the 4 of them have been holding out for hours. Fortunately, their coordinated teamwork and mutual cover prevented the zombies from getting close to the fence. However, their physical endurance was being heavily taxed, and gradually, they started to struggle. News has come from inside that all the wounded have been rescued. Yumiko hurriedly called out to her teammates to retreat. Without support, they'll die here. Magna, however, was stubborn. Knowing the damaged fence wouldn't withstand the zombies' advance, she was determined to fight on. This place was their hard-won home. Connie stepped in to persuade Magna, finally convincing her to withdraw. With no one to stop them, the zombies crowded against the fence. Just as Luke and his team had returned inside the community, they heard a resounding crash. The fence couldn't hold up any longer. The zombies poured into the community. Just then, Ezekiel, Michonne, and others arrived. Luke and the 4 of them, dragging their tired bodies, rushed up again. Eugene and the others got out of the car and got ready to fight. With the additional reinforcements, the zombies were no longer a formidable threat. Michonne, in particular, displayed exceptional speed in dispatching the zombies. Even Judith was capable of holding her own beside her mother. Judith's skillful fighting skills filled Michonne with pride. Mother and daughter fighting side by side increased their effectiveness twofold. Clearing the zombies became a matter of time, especially with the mother-daughter duo working in harmony. Lydia, who couldn't sleep inside the Alexandria safe zone, had intended to take a walk to clear her mind, but the wretched woman appeared in front of her again. Then 2 other men came out from behind Margo. Lydia was about to fight back with a long stick when Margo grabbed her from behind. The Whisperers nailed the heads of their friends to a post. They've always hated Lydia, and today they're provoking them in public. Margo wasted no time in telling Lydia that she'd better quietly leave the Alexandria safe zone now if she didn't want trouble. This way, no blame would fall on them.
You're my people. This is my home.
Hearing these words, Margo's anger flared, and she delivered a punch that sent Lydia sprawling to the ground. Another man rushed in to join, assaulting Lydia as well, before locking her down to immobilize her. The teenager kind of didn't want to get involved, but Margo kept egging him on. Just as Margo was about to do the dirty work, Negan hears the commotion and rushes out, tossing Margo aside. The other 2 men were too intimidated by Negan to make a move. Negan looks at Lydia on the floor. The child is bruised and battered. Lydia's cries of pain were heartbreaking. A man among them exclaimed, and everyone turned their attention. Unexpectedly, Margo, who had been thrown aside by Negan earlier, had collided with the wall. Now sporting a grievous head injury and a pool of blood, Negan himself was momentarily stunned. He realized the situation had taken a terrible turn, far from his intentions. After a while, the residents of Alexandria's safe zone gathered around. Siddiq examined Margo and confirmed her death. Eventually, Negan was taken away and imprisoned. Meanwhile, Lydia was escorted to the infirmary for treatment of her wounds. Daryl felt a pang of guilt seeing the suffering this young girl had endured. Daryl gently embraced Lydia, offering her comfort akin to that of a father figure. It's not fair to a child to have to go through something like this. A few minutes later, Daryl arrived in the dungeon. Negan was lying on the bed, fretting, and asked,
"How's the kid doing?"
She's banged up, but she'll be alright.
Negan's frown eases a little at Daryl's words. Daryl continued, "People outside are discussing how to execute you. They're saying this time Rick won't be able to save you." Negan remained unperturbed, seemingly unafraid, and responded casually, "Whatever they want. Man, she's an arsehole who beat up a kid. She's better off dead." Daryl was truly conflicted, and his attitude towards Negan had softened considerably after this incident. Deep down, everyone understood that Negan wasn't to blame, but the prejudice magnified Negan's murder. After a while, Daryl went to the radio station and contacted Michonne at the Hilltop. He explained the situation regarding Negan. Michonne understood the details but struggled to make a decision since Negan wasn't at fault. However, many saw this as an opportunity to eliminate him. After contemplating, Michonne entrusted her voting power to Daryl, urging him to decide as he saw fit. She emphasized the importance of protecting Lydia and preventing any harm from befalling her. Their border negotiations are going so well with just land cession. The waves of zombies didn't destroy the Alexandria safe zone because Lydia was there, although Lydia wasn't directly beneficial to them. If she were to flee due to this incident, or if Alpha believed they couldn't safeguard her, the consequences would be dire. Daryl realized the gravity of the situation and headed to the meeting room, where the committee was in session. The two individuals shamelessly claimed that Lydia and Negan had attacked them. Half an hour later, they left. The committee members began voting. Despite Negan having previously saved Aaron, he was urging others to execute Negan during the meeting. Ultimately, except for Gabriel, who remained undecided, Siddiq and Laura voted against the execution. The other three members were adamant about Negan's death. Daryl stepped in and mentioned, "Michonne asked me to vote on her behalf. Lydia says Negan did the right thing and saved her, so I'm against killing Negan." Now it was a tied vote of 3-3. Gabriel's decision would be crucial. Gabriel stood up, addressing the group. "I need to think this over tonight and give my decision in the morning." The next morning, Gabriel's face was clouded with worry. He had pondered all night and decided that, for the greater good, Negan should be executed. Shortly after, Gabriel went to the cell to talk to Negan, only to find it empty. Gabriel found Aaron and informed him the keys were left in the door. Someone deliberately let Negan go. While they were conversing, Lydia happened to overhear.
I did it.
After saying these words, Lydia walked into the cell by herself. After a while, Daryl arrived at the cell. He knew very well that Lydia hadn't let Negan go. However, in Lydia's mind, it didn't matter if it was her or not. She was just happy that Negan had fled. Moreover, with the people outside wanting to imprison her, the outcome pleased everyone. Daryl couldn't argue with Lydia's words, so he had to leave it at that for now. The complexity of human existence often lay in the inability to support the right side despite knowing what's right and wrong. Daryl understood that Negan had done a good deed, but he couldn't stop the committee from wanting his execution. Everyone knows Lydia had nothing to do with the Whisperer's behavior, but people always want to pick on her for psychological satisfaction. It's human nature. Daryl wanted to erase the words written on the door, but he couldn't erase people's hearts. Meanwhile, news had reached the Hilltop that Oceanside was facing a situation likely caused by the Whisperers. The crisis at the Hilltop had subsided, and Michonne decided to journey to Oceanside to assist. Luke volunteered to join, claiming that he felt the call of the ocean, but they both knew he was talking about the girl of his dreams. Luke smiled awkwardly. Michonne wanted Eugene to return to Alexandria's safe zone with the horse-drawn carriage. However, Eugene surprised everyone by expressing his desire to stay. He mentioned feeling a force calling him to help repair the walls there, using his professional knowledge. This departure from Eugene's usual behavior left everyone, including Michonne, stunned. This was not Eugene's style. Only Judith was sniggering. Eugene had been heartbroken by Rosita and wasn't ready to face her yet. Soon, they departed, carrying provisions of food and vegetables. The three major communities were genuinely supporting each other. The next day, repair work on the Hilltop's walls was in full swing. Eugene used his expertise to reinforce the walls further. Meanwhile, Ezekiel seemed lost in thought, his mind elsewhere. Just then, the sound of a motorcycle roared at the gate. Daryl arrived, accompanied by Siddiq. They were passing by the Hilltop, so they stopped by to take a look. It's still a mystery who let Negan go. The three of them engaged in casual conversation for a while. Ezekiel took Siddiq to the infirmary and wanted him to look at the wounded. Siddiq noticed that Ezekiel had been coughing since they met, despite Ezekiel's insistence that he was fine. Siddiq's medical intuition told him otherwise. Ezekiel realized his reaction had been too intense. He unbuttoned his collar, revealing a large lump on his neck. It had been growing for a month, and Ezekiel understood it was cancer. Siddiq tried to reassure him, suggesting it might be another ailment, but Ezekiel sadly replied, "Don't bother comforting me. My grandmother died of cancer, then my father. I know those coughs and swellings all too well. Originally, thyroid cancer had a survival rate of 98%, but times had changed, and they lacked the instruments and medications." In the end, Ezekiel said he was resigned to his fate and just wanted to talk to Carol. Siddiq wanted to help Ezekiel fulfill this wish, and later approached the radio to call the Alexandria safe zone. On the other end, his apprentice, Dr. Dante, responded. Dante shared that most of the people had gone out to search for Negan. He mentioned that Rosita and several others had fallen ill. experiencing symptoms like diarrhea and vomiting. Concerned, Siddiq decided to return overnight. After saying these words, Siddiq asked Dante to call Carol over to answer the phone. At that moment, Ezekiel walked in and sat in front of the microphone, eagerly awaiting Carol's voice. Ezekiel didn't know he was going to die one day. He just wanted to talk to the one he loved. However, when footsteps and the sound of a chair being pulled came through the radio, Ezekiel quickly shut off the power. Love is such a complicated thing. Meanwhile, in a forest, a man was washing his face in river water. It was none other than the escaped Negan. Negan said bad luck. They found him. The person who had arrived was a young man from Alexandria's safe zone. Surprisingly, the youth didn't bring up capturing Negan and even offered him a bottle of water. This left Negan somewhat baffled. After a while, Negan began to trim tree branches, preparing one as a makeshift weapon. Suddenly, a familiar yet somewhat unfamiliar whistling sound reached his ears. It turned out that the young man was named Brandon. Brandon had been a child when he and his parents joined the Saviors. His parents died in the war against Rick, but Brandon was adopted by Alexandria's safe zone. Brandon was fascinated by the Saviors as he grew up hearing about them from his father. Learning that Negan had escaped, Brandon immediately packed up and set out to follow him. He believed that Negan could rise again and subjugate the communities. Just like the old days, Brandon wanted to follow in his idol's footsteps. However, Negan had long abandoned his ambitions of being a leader. Over the years, he had become disillusioned and was now on the run just to stay alive. 10 minutes later, they reached a barbed wire fence, a clear boundary marked by the Whisperers. Brandon believed they should cross it, considering that the enemy of their enemy might be their friend, but Negan froze and rejected the idea. Suddenly a zombie lunges and Negan is tackled to the ground as he struggles to hold on. Brandon didn't come to help. Negan then pushed the zombie to the ground before getting up and strangling the zombie's head with a wire. After killing the zombie, Negan turned his head to look at Alex. Not only is the guy not helping, but he's making something that turns out to be a baseball bat. Brandon claimed it was a gift for Negan. Not only that, but Brandon had also stolen Negan's favorite leather jacket from the Alexandria Safe Zone storeroom. Brandon had heard his dad talk about Negan and knew that these two items were his favorites, to which Negan refused, telling Brandon to put it away.